And welcome in to another edition of Fourth Down in the Steel City. After our live post-game edition on Sunday night, we are ready to go. Turns out we may have gotten more sleep than the Steelers, at least those that aren't good at sleeping on planes. We'll get to that. We'll get to a bunch of stuff that Mike Tomlin had to say on Tuesday afternoon on the South Side. I happened to be there in person covering for Jeff Hathorn, Mr. Do-It-All for 93.7 The Fan. And Mike summarily shot down a couple of my schematic questions, which we can get to a little bit later, Josh. But as always, before we get started, let's remind everyone, subscribe, follow, like, react, comment. We welcome all of it. Make sure whether you're getting it inside your Odyssey app, AUDACY, it's free, download it today, or however you get your podcasts, that you are getting the latest episodes of Fourth Down in the Steel City as soon as they're ready. Easiest way to do that, follow the podcast or subscribe to it, whatever your podcast situation calls for. Or just keep checking back the 93.7 The Fan YouTube page and subscribe there, because the video versions of the podcast go up, and that's where you see us as you're looking at us right now, if you're on the YouTube page. Josh, nothing super shocking or surprising from Mike Tomlin's press conference today, but I thought we could kind of work through it item by item. There was a feeling down there this morning that there might be more to talk about regarding the layover in Kansas City. For those that are just catching up, Steelers were in the air after leaving Las Vegas late Sunday night. And apparently there was something with oil pressure in an engine, or I don't know. I can barely drive a car, let alone fly a plane. They wouldn't let me near one. But they had to divert to Kansas City to do some repairs on the plane. And apparently Mike Tomlin didn't want anybody getting off the plane. So he suggested everybody get some Z's. And if you're not sleeping, coaches will do some work. So they busted out the iPads and they did some work. But they were there for a long time, Josh. They were in Kansas City for upwards of about 8 or 9 hours, I've been told, just sitting on the tarmac in a plane, waiting to get moving again. And he said on Tuesday, we're going to make it a non-issue. To be honest with you, as I stand here now, it's a non-factor. My desire is that as we move away from it, we'll talk less about it, because I don't want it to be an excuse in any way, nor some galvanizing thing in any way. But he pointed out again, they had their iPads, so the coaches got work done while they told the players to rest. But it has kind of pushed their week back, say, half a day or so, and that a lot of the stuff they would normally do at the facility, as far as looking at tape together on a Monday, is going to have to wait for Wednesday. I don't think it's any great shakes. I don't think it slows them down in getting ready for the Texans, but definitely not the best way to recover from a game, especially the physical nature of it, by sitting in a plane for 9 hours.
Now, Chris, you know I'm not one to nitpick, but you're in Kansas City for 8 hours and no one ate any Gates barbecue?
No one gets any barbecue, right. Maybe that's why I didn't want to let him off the plane, because he knew they would immediately be gone to the barbecue place and not come back anytime soon.
I wouldn't make a big thing about it any other reason. But that's something to make a big stink about. Now, you can't leave me in Kansas City for that long with nowhere else to go and not get some Gates barbecue. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, have it Uber Eats to the plane, right?
DoorDash, man. Yeah, DoorDash at the airport. That's nothing new. I mean, I don't know if they're done with all the renovations and stuff there in the construction. You might not be able to find a place to park. But outside of that, I'm taking the same tact. But to be serious about it all, we've seen this before from Mike Tomlin. We've seen him do this with certain situations. We've seen him do this during the COVID season when everything was happening. And that was the infamous "we do not care" quote that became the meme in the choice video for certain people to use over and over again. He doesn't seek comfort. We know this. This is his thing. And quite frankly, I think we knew, given the circumstances, even under normal circumstances, they're going to fly back all night, get back early in the morning. And that kind of messes up the day a bit as far as them trying to get some rest and recover and stuff like that. So stuff like that is to be expected. Like you said, it shifts things around a little bit, but it totally doesn't kill them. We're not talking about the 2020 season where they lost their bye week entirely because another team decided they didn't want to follow the protocol at all. We're not there with that particular situation. So a lot of guys in this roster have seen and dealt with worse. So I don't think they're going to make a big stink about it.
What was interesting to me is that I asked him directly about several times on Sunday night when they got to the line of scrimmage and they were presented with 5 down linemen like they were against the Browns a couple times previous Monday, or stacked boxes, and they still ran the ball into those defensive fronts anyway. And I said, what kind of latitude does Kenny Pickett have in that situation? And it was interesting to me. He threw it right back on Matt Canada to an extent, saying, why would we have Kenny do it when we know there's 5 down linemen out there? It's not a player decision. It's a coaching decision. You see the defensive personnel that's coming on the field as you're making the calls. So he further explained, the checks are different from week to week. I think we need to get used to, as a fan base, one thing, while still I have questions about another. The one thing is, he's still a young quarterback. He has not yet played a full season's equivalency of games yet. So he's not necessarily going to be like Ben Roethlisberger, drawing plays up in the dirt, or just at the very least having an encyclopedic knowledge of the playbook in his head.
Who also was not doing the same thing at the same point of his career. We got to remind ourselves of that too.
Exactly. Young quarterbacks do not have the ability to walk to the line and check out of something and into anything else that may exist on planet Earth. They're limited. They're limited from a run to a run, or a run to a pass, or a pass to a pass, whatever, pass to run, whatever the situation may call for. And Mike Tomlin said as much to me on Tuesday afternoon. But what is interesting to me, Josh, is that on a week where we're all sort of looking at Matt Canada and saying, hey, you did some things right, bud. Good job. That sounds a little bit more to me from Mike Tomlin like, well, wait a second now. He's still running the ball into these 8-man fronts, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of that.
It tells me that there's still some work to do. I was really, really taken aback by what he mentioned in his opening address. He said sometimes getting better on the coaching end is putting more cohesive plans together. It sounded like he's saying, like, we did it good this time, and sometimes that makes a difference. It didn't sound like a backhanded compliment, but it said, okay, it was more like, okay, you got it right this time.
Exactly.
But can you do it in perpetuity? I think that's kind of what that rang. Not that I'm a Mike Tomlin interpreter. I like to think I'm better at it than most, but that's how it rang to me. And then just like you said, he said that's more of a coaching thing as far as that particular situation, as if to say, all right, we're putting this on you. You got to help us figure this thing out, because that's your job to figure this out. It sounds to me as if they're giving Matt Canada a lot of latitude, saying, hey, we're not going to kick you out the door, but we are going to make sure you earned your chair to stay in the room.
Sure.
And I don't think that's the same thing. I know a lot of people want to see him kicked out the door yesterday, and they've made plenty of cases as to why. We're not going to get into those here. But based on what we saw this past week, and you saw a lot of people that watch film for a living, people that have played this game, they're saying, hey, look, Matt Canada called a pretty good game. Mm-hmm. And you heard different people talking about it, whether it was Mike Tomlin or the players. They were saying, look, we had success doing this because we were able to start doing the basic things well, because they were able to run the ball and get some success for it. And we talked about it after the game. That first drive, they went 3 and out, but they got 9 yards in 2 plays running the football. It just so happened that third play was a third down play they use very often in that situation. And the other team pretty much was like, hey, if they line up with this and this down the distance, that's when you stop them, and that's what you expect. But outside of that 3rd and 1 play, the first 2 plays, you got into a 3rd and 1, you did your job well. So the fact that they were running the ball, despite those 5-man fronts that we're talking about, you get 4 yards and then 5 yards and 2 carries, you're doing okay from that perspective. So I think knowing that led to some at least early understanding of, all right, at least we're getting some push and some space up front to give us some breathing room. I think that's what led to everything else. And Mike Tomlin pointed this out too. He said, it's hard to do anything with your quarterback, like rolling Kenny Pickett out. He said, it's something we plan to do, but it's hard to do when you have 15 plays in 5 possessions. Yeah. You can't really expand your playbook if the early stuff you're doing is not working. And I think a lot of that is hand in glove.
Well, and I think a lot of this comes back to a concept that I think Mike Tomlin is very comfortable with. Otherwise, he wouldn't continue to allow Matt Canada to have the latitude to do it. You've described it several times this season already, in that they look at the first couple of possessions as an opportunity to not just set things up for later, but kind of diagnose what the defense is presenting to them. It's why, this thing that we shared it. I shared it with you guys in the text thread earlier. The first 15 plays of the game, what are usually for most teams, the scripted plays, the Steelers are far below every other team in the league on EPA per play on their first 15 plays of offense per game. And it feeds into what I think Matt Canada, and maybe this is what Mike Tomlin's telling him and why he was a little happier with what he saw against Vegas, because first and second down in the first series, like you talked about, Matt Canada's got to do a better job of working through that progression as an offensive coordinator of, hey, I'm not going to spend the first 10 to 12 to 15 plays trying to figure out the opposition. I'm going to go into it knowing, okay, I've got maybe 1, 2, 3 options I'm going to be presented by a defense, and I'm going to diagnose them in the first, say, 5 to 6 plays. So that's something I want to see. Does this offense, because they can't continue to work from behind, right? That's part of their Achilles heel, this offense. The reason things looked as good as they did at times on Sunday night was because they had the lead most of the time. They were able to dictate the terms.
After 8 minutes to go in the second quarter, they never trailed again, and it was never tied again.
Right.
That's a huge difference.
Oh, night and day to what we saw against Cleveland, and certainly what we saw against San Francisco. It loops back on that Mike Tomlin quote you just mentioned, where he talked about, hey, we're going to be more diverse in our offense if we're running more plays, and we've got more opportunity to do that if we're not constantly 3 and out. That all feeds into, I think the message is probably still, hey, you did all right. You got to keep doing better on the offensive side. Canada and Pickett.
I'll take what you're saying about diagnosing in the first 5 to 6 plays. I'll scale it down even further. You had success running the ball in those first 2, and you had 3rd and 1. What's one of the things we talked about worked Sunday? They used play action. You know what would have been a good time to use play action?
Yeah.
That 3rd and 1 on your first drive when you ran for 5 yards and 4 yards on first and second down. That is the time when you start to say, hey, let's try this here. And this is something that I've had talks with other people about over the years. And I've heard this theory that there are some coaches that like to treat the beginning of the game just like the end of the game. They have their idea of, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do that. And if you take the time in the quarter out of the equation, sometimes they could look the same as far as how the play calling gets constituted. Am I saying that this is a direct situation? No, but there are some people that have that theory. Could we have seen a play like they used on that 3rd down to go to Allen Robinson in one of those drives to extend it, something to that degree? That would have been nice. Or just like I said before, something that involves play action, because it's something that actually plays off of what you would have seen before. Because any other time they get 3rd and 1 in that situation, they do that thing with the 2 tight ends and they bring the guy in motion and they run that fullback dive, and it doesn't work a lot of the time. This would have been one of those times, hey, bring out play action because the defense isn't looking for it.
Yeah.
We've been talking about how predictable this offense can be. Do something they don't see coming for a change, and maybe you have different results.
That's the thing. Like, it reminds me of, we've all got, I'm sure you do. I have, family members that, like, they have to, you get together for like a family holiday, right? And they got to eat dinner at a certain time, right? Dinner going to be ready at 5:30, 5:45, no later than that, right? I got to sit down. I got to eat so I can take my pills. It's not always the older people in the family, but sometimes. Anyway, my point is this. They are so regimented in how they want to approach the beginning of games that they're not allowing themselves the freedom and the fluidity that Mike Tomlin talks about there outside of having an early lead. And you can't always count on that. You're going to have to be more fluid, more flexible, even when you're behind in games, in order to really, truly get the full scope of an offense and give the defense a challenge, not just a physical challenge, but a mental challenge. Because if they know, oh, it's 3rd and 1, Pickett's under center, let's stack the line, bring the linebackers up, bring a safety up while you're at it, then they've got to find more unpredictability. I'm using the wrong term, I'm sure, but they can't constantly wait to have the lead and to be piecing together long drives in order to get to that point where they find more diversity in the offense, I don't think.
Yeah, there has to be a point where you can't keep going to the same well over and over again. And I understand that, like you said, there are some things that are just regimented. There are some people that just have their tendencies and their habits, and some things you can set your watch to, but it doesn't have to be, something that everybody in the arena or everybody in the stadium knows is coming. It doesn't have to be that particular situation. And I think we figured out just exactly why this offense had the struggles that it did. Because, we talked about this with San Francisco. When you have so much going against you at the same time, and you get to the second quarter, you're into the first quarter, you're already down by 10. By the time you get the ball with 2 minutes left in the second quarter, you're down by what? Was it 17? I think it was some ridiculous number, or 13. You're trying to figure out, or I think they might have been down by 20, but you're trying to figure out exactly how to get some rhythm going. And at that point, you're just trying to find anything that works. You don't have to necessarily go that route, but you at least need to have some sort of, I talked about this, I think, on Twitter with some people. Just have one or two corollaries. If A, then B. If B, then C. Just have something there specifically that it doesn't have to be a completely different concept, just tweaking something slightly. It's something that might be a shotgun look instead of an under center look. Something that might be a shotgun look that might be a run play, or an under center look that becomes a play action and rollout, an opportunity for Kenny Pickett to make the play that he can make. It doesn't have to be big. It just needs to be something that's subtle that just throws people off.
What was slightly amusing to me, I've seen some people are already big mad about it. I go into these situations knowing that coaches and players are very rarely 110% truthful and honest with us, right? Like, they're going to tell us what they want to tell us and let us know what we need to know. What was kind of amusing to me, and I thought some of the other people down on the South Side today, was that when Brooke Pryor of ESPN asked Mike Tomlin about his mojo comment from last week, right? Which he gave right off the top. He talked about how he felt like his offense had lost some of their mojo. He pivoted right back and said, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm paraphrasing that. I'm going to be straight with you. I didn't mean that. You guys kept asking me questions, and so I threw out a colorful word or phrase. I do that sometimes just to get you to shut up. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Now, it was interesting that, again, you could go back and see that he threw out the offensive mojo thing early before he was asked a question, but the point still stands. Sometimes he's going to say things just to say things. All coaches do, all players do. Najee saw right through it, right? I don't know if you saw Najee's post-game comments. He said sometimes Mike T just be saying some, and
Najee don't care. He don't.
No. So if Najee and the players and the coaches can see through it, I think sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously. And I saw some people, they were big mad Tuesday afternoon about the fact that Mike Tomlin, he just, what? Yeah, it happens sometimes.
Folks, when I hear people complain about he says this in press conferences, he's giving you what he's giving you because he doesn't want to give you what you want. I'm sorry. It's been 17 years? He's been not giving us what we've wanted for 17 years. And you think it's going to be different. Why?
It's not.
And I tell people all the time, I'm like, how many coaches' press conferences do you watch? Because most of the time, they don't tell you anything. They don't give you anything material because they don't want the possibility of someone else, i.e. the opposing city or opposing teams, media people, hearing what might happen or hearing what they might be leaning toward. They're not going to give you that. They don't want to give you anything of what they're doing because, God forbid, someone knows what they're going to see when they walk into the stadium. Now, granted, with this particular offense, they don't have that problem because other defenses know anyway. But still, it still comes back to the general premise of not giving anything away because you don't want to tip your hand. And he's been doing this for 17 years. Not to mention the fact, before last season, he did a podcast with Ryan Clark and I believe it was Fred Taylor and Channing Crowder. He told him, he's like, look, I'm not giving you a window into my soul. He said it then. I'm not going to tell you everything was on my mind because after that, there really is no point of him being there. He's pretty much given the entire game away. There's probably not even need to play it. But you can't explain that to some people. This is also a fan base that, by the way, will believe memes and believe internet stories written by people named Happy Gilmore. So you got to take it with a grain of salt sometimes. about what people get upset about. Like there's a group that I'm in on Facebook. I'm not going to say which one, but someone put a meme up of Mike Tomlin saying this quote that sounded so ridiculous that would never come out of his mouth. And people are like, see, that's the stuff he says all the time. I'm like, folks, it's a meme. We're believing memes now. It's really ridiculous.
I think that's more indicative of humanity, of humanity's place in the death spiral as a whole, rather than just sports. But yeah, you're right.
And there's this contingent of people that think that they're just supposed to know everything that's happening, that they think they deserve to hear all the information, that they deserve to know what the team is going to do. Let me quote Snoop from season 5 of The Wire. Deserve got nothing to do with it. Okay? These guys do what they do for a reason. They're not going to give you what they're doing before they step out in the field. What's the use of stepping on the field?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So it was just, it's funny to me when people, can't believe he did. You know what? He doesn't owe you the truth. He doesn't. Neither do any of the players. Neither does anybody else. I mean,
I guarantee you, he walked out that room and didn't think twice about what he said when it was over.
No, in fact, he repeated himself. Once the mics were off, he repeated himself again, Josh, saying, listen, you guys got to know that mojo thing. Just sometimes I get tired of answering your questions. And it's like,
he gets tired of answering questions often. Let's be honest, especially from certain people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Certain people that we know quite well.
Yes. He did the one. I'll tell you the question he loved, though. Oh, the question Mike Tomlin loved this Tuesday. He was asked about Will Anderson of Alabama, who was the 3rd overall pick in the draft, taken in the 1st round by the Texans right after they took C.J. Stroud. And I thought he was going to have to strip down, Josh, and give himself a cold shower right there at the podium. The look on his face was like me when I discovered my uncle's stack of Playboys in his office. He literally went, whew. Will Anderson. Love Will Anderson. Really talented guy. And then went on this long soliloquy, this long story, which actually ended up being very insightful.
It was a great story.
About the process he, and it used to be Kevin Colbert, now it's Omar Khan, the process they go through at Alabama's Pro Day specifically, and how they go down there to Tuscaloosa every spring, and they invite all the best players to a dinner. And they know full well that some of those guys are going to respectfully decline because they know the Steelers are picking wherever they are in the 1st round, and that they're projected to go a whole lot higher, and they'll never fall to the Steelers. But he said Will Anderson, despite that, came out to the dinner anyway when they went to Bama's Pro Day this past spring, sat right to Mike Tomlin's left. Brian Branch, for what it's worth, sat directly to his right. And he sat there and talked ball with these guys all night, specifically Will Anderson, and said he could tell he had a passion for the game, and he's not really surprised with Anderson's relatively hot start to the season. I think a Baker's dozen of tackles, a sack. He blocked a field goal last week. He gushed over Will Anderson. And what's interesting to me is that this is one of those things. This is another thing that I think gets lost in the sauce sometimes is Mike Tomlin builds these relationships, and he's well known for doing it. He builds these relationships in the pre-draft process. And look, Will Anderson may not be a Houston Texan forever. Will Anderson may be a free agent someday, and Will Anderson may have his choices of places to play. And whether it's Will Anderson or Brian Branch or Minkah Fitzpatrick, guys have an opportunity to go elsewhere once they're through the first few years of their career in some cases. And when he's built up the relationship that he has with some of these players, you can tell they admire him for what he's accomplished as an NFL head coach. He admires the way they play the game. He's always got a relationship with that guy now going forward. It's almost like a way early recruiting process for when that guy gets through his rookie contract. If he does get through his rookie contract and he's thinking about, well, I just spent X amount of years in Houston and things didn't go well. Are the Steelers interested? I remember Mike Tomlin was a really good guy when I hung out with him at Pro Day. Like, that's something that he is. You talk about doing things now for later down the line. That is prime right there.
Chris, we have a word for that in our line of work. We call it networking.
Yep.
Actually, a lot of people use that word in their line of work as networking. So you laid all of it out very succinctly and very well. And there are people who hear that and get upset about it. I don't understand why he talks to all these people in the draft. He's not picking them anyway. Folks, networking carries some kind of weight. And the only thing that bothers me more than the people that complain is that some of the people complaining, and Chris, some might take offense to this, and it might not even be necessarily our listeners, but colleagues that we have that may take offense to this. Chris, we work in a business where sometimes the reason why you get a job is the guy you worked with previously, where you went to school, who your professor was, where you worked at your last station. That's sometimes how we get from job to job in our profession. And we have
in lots of professions, right?
And not we particularly, because we're not the ones that do this, but colleagues of ours will sit in the seats that they sit in and try to run down a coach from an NFL franchise for doing the same exact thing. It is the biggest and stupidest slice of irony I've ever heard of. And I say all the time that irony is undefeated. But there are people who literally have gotten their jobs doing the exact same thing, coming down on Mike Tomlin for doing it. I'll point to another thing that I think is relevant to this particular topic. During the broadcast Sunday night, I don't know if everybody was paying attention, Chris Collinsworth told a really good story about Mike Tomlin. He talked about how he meets with players during the draft process and how he builds these relationships. He says some of these guys come up for trades or they come up for free agency. He said, Mike Tomlin says, I have this list of guys that I already know I want to call. And I call them and they say, what took you so long, coach? We were waiting for you to call. He said, there are guys that I've, scouted in the draft process and their parents get upset with me because I didn't take them. But then they become free agents or opportunity for a trade down the road happens and they come in. And how many stories have we heard, Chris, of guys that have come here from other organizations that follow that exact same storyline? Joe Hayden among them. Patrick Peterson among them. Minkah Fitzpatrick fits this dynamic perfectly. They took Minkah Fitzpatrick out, same thing, guy from Alabama, took him out to dinner during his pro day, and Mike Tomlin gushed about Minkah Fitzpatrick the same way he gushed about Will Anderson. He was a guy that really just admired the way he played football. And it also doesn't hurt when Nick Saban calls you the smartest player that he's ever coached. I think that goes a long way. But then Minkah Fitzpatrick, 4 years ago, becomes available in the trade. They trade for him after week 2. And the rest, as they say, is history. There's a reason why some of this stuff happens. There's a reason why it pays off. And for people to complain about it is absolutely insane because go look at some other rosters where teams could upgrade talent and they fail to over time, or they turn over talent on their rosters year after year because they don't know how to bring guys in. And this guy's been doing it for a decade and a half.
Or just places where people don't like. Tom Coughlin won a pair of Super Bowls in New York. I'm not here to denigrate Tom Coughlin.
I got a theory behind that, but we'll save that for another show. Greg knows my theory.
I want to hear it. Hold on. But nobody liked playing for Tom Coughlin. No. I know guys that had to play for Tom Coughlin that saw players get benched because they weren't 5 minutes early for a meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And they couldn't stand playing for Tom Coughlin. Now, that aside, they may have won some games with Tom Coughlin, and that's all well and good, but nobody was going to Jacksonville when he was there. Nobody was going out of their way to go to New York because he was there, despite 2 Super Bowl rings. Mm-hmm. So that does matter. You're right. The networking part of it does matter. What's your Tom Coughlin theory?
Oh, well, actually, I have 2 theories. One is that the reason why Tom Coughlin beat Bill Belichick twice, they're both Parcells guys. Takes a Parcells guy to beat a Parcells guy. That's one theory.
Okay.
The other theory is a little bit way down the rabbit hole, and Greg knows exactly where I'm going.
So now I'm primed for it.
MCU fans will appreciate this. I have this theory that Eli Manning is a Loki variant, but that's an entirely different dynamic. And I could go into the details, but it would just take an entirely different episode. Just trust me about the fact that Tom Coughlin winning 2 Super Bowls, there's some magic and science in there that we haven't discovered yet. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Greg, I trust this is probably more built for an off-season episode, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It totally is.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll save our Tom Coughlin, Loki, Eli Manning.
Eli Manning is a Loki variant. I think Tom Brady kind of gave us the hint. That's what I'm saying.
All right. We'll save
Tom Brady was like, look, you really think I would go for a script where I lose to Peyton Manning's little brother twice? Eli's the younger brother. Just take that seed and let it grow from there.
All right, I'm gonna let it fester back here in this corner of my brain right here.
I told you you didn't want to know.
Yeah, when I wake up in a cold sweat from a dream tonight where Eli Manning and Peyton and Tom Coughlin and okay. Anyway, Last thing I wanted to touch on from Tomlin Tuesday was this. He was impressed with the way Steelers Nation took over Vegas. Said it was almost home-like. And he did, for practical purposes, not just for the purpose of stroking the fans' ego, but he did reinforce the importance of stacking quality road wins. And this weekend is another opportunity to do that. Although he admitted we might get challenged from a hostile environmental perspective more in Houston, but we might not. Steelers Nation might show up in Houston as well. And he said, I'd be glad to see them if they do. Now, I will say this. While Houston, where my dad was from, where I was born, didn't really live there extensively as a kid, lived in South Texas, but here nor there. While Houston may not be the biggest tourist attraction in the world, certainly nothing like Vegas or LA or even Seattle, where they're going to go towards the end of the season, it is one of the most central locations in the country geographically and has some of the easiest access as far as airfare goes for fans, Steeler fans from around the country. If they're thinking, hey, I'm looking for a Steeler game to go to this year, I can't afford Vegas, I can't afford LA, Seattle's too late in the year, maybe it's Houston. I think we might see a decent number of terrible towels at what is it? Is it Reliant Stadium? Yeah, Reliant.
I think it's
Stadium.
Energy now. Is it Energy?
Energy.
It changed it like 4 times.
That place where the Texans play.
Yeah.
I think we might see a whole lot of yellow towels.
I'll say this much, and here's another factor that comes into it: the cheap availability for tickets.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't got to pay $500, $600 a pop like our buddy Dave talked about in Vegas. It's a much different dynamic. It's gonna be probably cheaper to get tickets in Houston. And I will say this: being a former resident of the South for about 3 years. One of the first things I ran into meeting people when I moved down south is I ran into a lot of Steeler fans when they found out I was from Pittsburgh. I ran into a lot of Steeler fans. And I'll probably bet I got a couple fans that live in Arkansas that might be in Houston by the time that game kicks off. Shout out to my buddy Cherie. She's one of them in Arkansas. But there is a contingent of Steeler fans all over the South. And there are some that have the wildest stories of why they're Steeler fans. A lot of it is, oh, my family lived here, or my parents were fans back then. And so I wouldn't put it past Mike Tomlin for him dropping a hit like that. That might have been strategically placed just to see if he can get some extra people to think, hey, maybe we can make that trip to Houston and go on down there and see the game. I don't put that past him to maybe plant that seed for a few people and get some extra fans in Houston.
And seriously, it might be the most affordable option for Steeler fans who don't live in Pittsburgh. If you live in Pittsburgh and you can't get to a Steelers game because you don't have season tickets, you don't know somebody who has them, whatever it may be. And you think about it, the next closest option is Cleveland, Cincy, or Baltimore. Okay, I get it. Well, this year, the way the schedule stacks, you're going to have to do some traveling. You're going to afford the airfare to go to Seattle, or like we talked about, the tickets in Vegas or LA for that matter. Houston might be the next best opportunity. And let's be honest, we know there's a big contingent of Steeler fans in Mexico too. Yep, and it's not that far a drive up from Mexico to Houston. So I don't know. I think we might see a decent number of Steeler fans there on Sunday afternoon.
I'd be surprised if it was anything less than a 40 to 50% Steeler fan contingent.
You think that many? I was going to say 70-30. I was going to say 70-30, but yeah.
My baseline is 40% Steeler fans. Anything less than that, I'd be stunned. Seriously.
As we progress throughout the week, we will continue to build up towards that game at NRG Stadium. Sorry, let's get the corporate sponsorships in. NRG Stadium on Sunday in Houston. We'll talk some more about what Mike Tomlin had to say about C.J. Stroud, because he had pretty glowing reviews on him as well, as we build through this thing throughout the week and up to what could be and again, by all accounts, a lot of Steeler fans look at it this way, should be a 3-1 start to the season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But there are some things that the Texans have put together under DeMeco Ryans and Bobby Slowick, an important San Francisco connection there. Perhaps we will see some similar things week 4 that we saw in week 1. Something to think about, and something that we will talk about as we progress through the week and build up to that game. Thanks to Greg Finley, our producer, and fellow Marvel Universe conspiracy theorist, alongside Josh Taylor. I'm Chris Mack. Make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast however you get your podcast. This is Fourth Down in the Steel City.